Chapter 1. Sarah Godfrey was lying on the bed, tying a kerchief on the dog Boise. "Hold your chin up, Boise, will you?" she said as she braced herself on one elbow. Now this is what you'd call the hook. The writer is grabbing the reader with action and dialogue in order to draw the reader into the story. We also know that Sarah is going to be the main character and narrator because she is the first character mentioned, and that the story will be told from her point of view, or POV. All right, let's continue. We picked up here where it says the dog was old. The dog was old, slept all the time, and he was lying on his side with his eyes closed while she lifted his head and tied the scarf. Her sister Wanda was sitting at the dressing table combing her hair. Wanda said, "Why don't you leave Boise alone? There's nothing else to do." Sarah answered without looking up. "You want to see a show?" "Not particularly. It's called The Many Faces of Boise." "Now I know I don't want to see it." Sarah held up the dog with the kerchief neatly tied beneath his chin and said, "The first face of Boise, proudly presented for your entertainment and amusement, is the Russian peasant woman. Ta-da!" So here is a picture of a Russian peasant woman. So just imagine Boise the dog with the scarf wrapped around his head like this. Leave the dog alone. He likes to be in shows, don't you, Boise? She untied the scarf, refolded it, and set it carefully on top of the dog's head. And now for the second face of Boise, we travel halfway around the world to the mysterious East, where we see Boise, the inscrutable Hindu. Ta-da! So here's a picture of a Hindu man, and you can imagine Boise, the dog, with a scarf wrapped around his head like a turban. With a sigh, Wanda turned and looked at the dog. That's pathetic. In people's age, that dog is 84 years old. She shook a can of hairspray and sprayed her hair. Besides, that's my good scarf. Oh, all right. Sarah fell back heavily against the pillow. I can't do anything around here. Now, I marked little sentences like that because they show a shift in the character's tone. A shift in tone will indicate a change in how the character is feeling or thinking about things. If you pay close attention, you'll notice that Sarah's tone shifts a lot during this chapter, which gives us a clue to how she's feeling inside. Well, if it's going to make you that miserable, I'll watch the show. I don't want to do it anymore. It's no fun now. This place smells like a perfume factory. She put the scarf over her face and stared up through the thin blue material. Beside her, Boise lay back down and curled himself into a ball. They lay without moving for a moment, and then Sarah sat up on the bed and looked down at her long, lanky legs. She said, "I have the biggest feet in the school." Honestly, Sarah, I hope you're not going to start listing all the millions of things wrong with you, because I just don't want to hear it again. I highlighted the millions of things wrong with you because that was an example of figurative language. Specifically, it was hyperbole. That's when you exaggerate and take things to an extreme in order to make a point. That's one reason why I chose this book, because it's filled with not only just great description, great characters, it's also full of nice examples of figurative language. So you can see how this fits in with not just poetry, but prose as well. Well, it's the truth about my feet. One time in phys ed, the boys started throwing the girls' sneakers around, and Bull Durham got my sneakers and put them on, and they fit perfectly. How do you think it feels to wear the same size as Bull Durham? So, judging by the name, Bull Durham's obviously a very big boy. I can make a personal connection here. Sarah's about 13 years old, and at that age, a lot of kids go through an awkward phase where they're very self-conscious about their bodies, and something that they perceive as a flaw or something wrong with them usually is like they feel in their mind it's magnified like a billion times, and that everyone's looking at them and judging them on it and usually making fun of them behind their backs. Let's continue. People don't notice things like that. No, they don't. I have perfectly terrible hands. Look at my fingers. Only I don't go around all the time saying, everybody look at my stubby fingers. I have stubby fingers, everybody. To make people notice, you should just ignore things that are wrong with you. The truth is everyone else is so worried about what's wrong with them that, and again, this is just really good advice. So it tells you that Wanda is trying to be a good big sister to Sarah. I also wish I had an older sibling like her when I was that age. Let's continue. It's very difficult to ignore the fact that you have huge feet when Bull Durham is dancing all over the gym in your shoes. They were not stretched the tiniest little bit when he took them off either. Ouch. You wear the same size shoe as Jackie Kennedy Onassis, if that makes you feel any better. Here's a picture of Jackie Kennedy Onassis. She was the wife of President John F. Kennedy, who was killed or assassinated in Dallas, Texas in the early 1960s. She later married a man named Aristotle Onassis and was then known as Jackie Kennedy Onassis. She was considered one of the most beautiful women in the world at the time and was also famous for her charity work. How do you know? Because one time when she was going into an Indian temple, she had to leave her shoes outside and some reporter looked in them to see what size they were. She leaned close to the mirror and looked at her teeth. Her feet look littler. Here's a picture of an Indian temple for you. That's because she doesn't wear orange sneakers. I like my orange sneakers. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, slipped her feet into the shoes, and held them up. What's wrong with them? Nothing, except that when you want to hide something, you don't go painting it orange. That was just, again, more good advice. I've got to go. Frank's coming. That's why she's getting all dolled up. She's meeting a boy. She went out the door, and Sarah could hear her crossing into the kitchen. Sarah lay on the bed, back on the bed, her head next to Boise. She looked at the sleeping dog, and then covered her face with her hands and began to cry noisily. Oh, Boise, Boise, I'm crying, she wailed. Years ago, when Boise was a young dog, he could not bear to hear anyone cry. Sarah had only to pretend she was crying, and Boise would come running. He would whine and dig at her with his paws and lick her hands until she stopped. Now he lay with his eyes closed. Boise, I'm crying, she said again. I'm really crying this time. Boise doesn't love me. The dog shifted uneasily without opening his eyes. Now I thought it might be another fun extension activity to rewrite the chapter from Boise's point of view, to see how he might feel about Sarah and Wanda and being dressed up, especially being dressed up at the beginning of the chapter. Let's continue. Boise, Boise, I'm crying. I'm so sad, Boise, she wailed, then stopped and sat up abruptly. You don't care about anybody, do you, Boise? The person could cry herself to death these days and you wouldn't care. Wow. Serious tone shift there. She got up and left the room. In the hall, she heard the tapping noise of Boise's feet behind her, and she said without looking at him, I don't want you now, Boise. Go on back in the bedroom. Go on. She went a few steps farther, and when he continued to follow her, turned and looked at him. In case you're confused, Boise, a dog is supposed to comfort people and run up and nuzzle them and make them feel better. All you want to do is lie on soft things and hide bones in the house because you are too lazy to go outside. Just go on back in the bedroom. She started into the kitchen, still followed by Boise, who could not bear to be left alone. She then heard her aunt and Aunt Wanda arguing, wondering what that's about, changed her mind and went out on the porch. Behind her, Boise scratched at the door, and she let him out. "Now quit following me." Her brother Charlie was sitting on the top step, and Sarah sat down beside him. She held out her feet, looked at them, and said, "I like my orange sneakers. Don't you, Charlie?" He did not answer. He had been eating a lollipop and the stick had come off, and now he was trying to put it back into the red candy. He had been trying for so long that the stick was bent. "Here," she said, "I'll do it for you." She put the stick in and handed it to him. "Now be careful with that." She sat without speaking for a moment, then she looked down at her feet and said, "I hate these orange sneakers. I just hate them." She leaned back against the porch railing so she wouldn't have to see them and said, "Charlie, I'll tell you something. This has been the worst summer of my life." She did not know exactly why this was true. She was doing the same thing she had done last summer. Walk to the Dairy Queen with her friend Mary, babysit for Mrs. Hodges, watch television, yet everything was different. So I highlighted that because that seemed very important to me. It speaks to a problem that Sarah is having. Here we go. It was as if her life was a huge kaleidoscope, and the kaleidoscope had been turned, and now everything was changed. The same stones shaken no longer made the same design. So here's a picture of a kaleidoscope. You look in it at this end, like it was a telescope, and then you change, when you turn this part around, the design inside will shift and change. So you can see how that would be a good metaphor. A direct comparison, using a direct comparison between two things. Another example of figurative language. This time she's comparing her life right now to a kaleidoscope in that it's constantly changing. But it was not only one different design, one change, it was 100, and she can never really be sure of anything this summer. One moment she was happy, and the next, for no reason, she was miserable. We've been seeing plenty of examples of that. An hour ago she had loved her sneakers. Now she detested them. "Charlie, I'll tell you what this awful summer's been like. You remember when that thinky Jim Wilson got you on the seesaw? Remember that? He kept bouncing you up and down, and then he'd keep you up in the air for a real long time. Then he'd drop you down real sudden, and you couldn't get off, and you thought you never would. Up and down for the rest of your life. Well, that's what this summer's been like for me." Aha, another metaphor. He held out the candy and the stick to her. "Not again." She took it from him. "This piece of candy is so gross that I don't even want to touch it, if you want to know the truth." She put the stick back in and handed it to him. Now it comes off again. "Now if it comes off again, and I mean this, Charlie Godfrey, I'm throwing the candy away." So again, another shift in tone. Makes me wonder if she's really mad at Charlie, or if she's just, this is just spilling over from how she's feeling overall. I'm also wondering what's going on with Charlie. In this scene, he doesn't talk at all. He doesn't respond to Sarah. It's almost like she isn't even there. So, what's going on with Charlie? Hopefully, we'll find out. Or actually, I have a feeling for sure we're going to find out as the story continues. So that's the end of the first video. Feel free to go back and watch it as many times as you'd like. When you're ready, go to exittix.com. There's a quiz there, along with some discussion questions. All of those will be worth extra credit. See you in class tomorrow.